Good morning. It is Monday, June the 3rd, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much. This is Ronald T. Hardgrove, and this is my podcast called The Drill. It is about the difference between being a true conservative and being a reactionary. It's about what true conservatism is and why it matters. And my podcast can be heard on Spreaker. It's also on iTunes and Spotify. I have links to it on Twitter, and also I have a Facebook page called The Drill. My email address for anyone that wants to contact me is storytimes@hotmail.com. You're not a Trump supporter, are you? You're not a conservative, are you? So you believe that anyone who questions President Obama's nationality isn't racist? How you deal with these questions and questions like them determines whether or not you're a true conservative. What's a true conservative? I'll give you an example. The left is always creating movements towards socialist paradise. A reactionary is defiant of those movements and creates counter movements. A true conservative is unmoved, refuses to be moved unless there's a good reason to do so. Being truly conservative is about also integrity. Maintaining your integrity is about listening carefully, reading carefully, and about not getting tricked, about responding and not reacting. Integrity is also about how you live, not just how you vote. True conservative is not merely a political identity, but a philosophical reality. True conservatism is fundamentally about being realistic, and being realistic is fundamentally about making the presumption for the status quo. Who are the true conservatives? They are the people that understand that conservatism is a lifestyle. They are patriotic people who use common sense. They trust their judgment, speak clearly and definitively, and are not afraid to say no. They are open-minded, asking why rather than why not. They are consistent, credible, and influential. Not ashamed of their existence, unafraid to learn or correct their mistakes. They are normal Americans. And so far there's only two true conservatives in the United States of America today, and that is myself and President Donald J. Trump. When I come back, it's going to be the Op Hawkeye Memorial of the Day. Thank you. Today's Memorial of the Day goes to Captain Charles D. Robinson, who is a U.S. Army captain who was born September 25th, 1975, and was sadly killed in action June the 3rd, 2005. He was awarded the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart, and he was killed during Operation Enduring Freedom. And I'm getting this from op_Hawkeye on Instagram. And when I come back, I'm going to be reading the Ayn Rand concept of the day from the Ayn Rand lexicon. Thank you very much. The concept of the day from the Ayn Rand lexicon is democracy. Democratic, in its original meaning, refers to unlimited majority rule, a social system in which one's work, one's property, one's mind, and one's life are at the mercy of any gang that may muster the vote of majority at any moment for any purpose. If we discard morality and substitute for it the collectivist doctrine of unlimited majority rule, if we accept the idea that a majority may do anything it pleases and that anything done by a majority is right because it's done by a majority, this being the only standard of right and wrong, how are men to apply this in practice to their actual lives? Who is the majority? In relation to each particular man, all other men are potential members of that majority, which may destroy him at its pleasure at any moment. Then each man and all men become enemies. Each has to fear and suspect all. Each must try to rob and murder first before he is robbed and murdered. The American system is not a democracy. It is a constitutional republic. A democracy, if you attach meaning to terms, is a system of unlimited majority rule. The classic example is ancient Athens, and the symbol of it is the fate of Socrates, who was put to death legally because the majority didn't like what he was saying, although he had initiated no force and had violated no one's rights. Democracy, in short, is a form of collectivism, which denies individual rights. The majority can do whatever it wants with no restriction. In principle, the democratic government is all-powerful. Democracy is a totalitarian manifestation. It is not a form of freedom. The American system is a constitutionally limited republic, restricted to the protection of individual rights. In such a system, majority rule is applicable only to lesser details, such as the selection of certain personnel. But the majority has no say over the basic principles governing the government. It has no power to ask for or gain the infringement of individual rights. And that was democracy, the concept of the day from the Ayn Rand lexicon. Let me also say that for Aristotle, the word democracy was a pejorative. That what we're really looking for is what Aristotle referred to as polity. That a democracy is a group of people that are acting only in their own, each individual's best interests, rather than the best interests of the society as a whole. And acting in the best interests of the society as a whole is what a polity is all about. So that was the word of the day, concept of the day, which is democracy. And the concepts and abstractions are extremely important because that's the way modern human beings, modern people communicate. It is the troglodytes, the cavemen that communicated by storytelling and picture painting. So when I come back, we will be, we'll see in a minute. Thank you very much. Welcome back. So I'm going to be reading now from Out of the Ashes, Rebuilding American Culture. Fundamentally, what's at stake in this country is sanity, but after that is culture. What kind of a culture are we going to be? And this is a book that addresses that issue. So this is a paragraph that's called Jesus, Priceless Treasure. Where your treasure is, says Jesus, there will your heart will lie also. We can tell where a person's heart lies by where they place their treasure. In material terms, we are by far the wealthiest generation of people who have ever lived on earth. Yet our original accomplishments in all of the arts are meager at best. At worst, we show a heavy net deficit. The modern world has destroyed almost as many forms of art, not just individual works of art, but the very genres, as the people of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance invented. Renaissance painting and sculpture, music and poetry, are what you get when a vigorous, popular, and learned tradition that had already been immensely creative meets again the classics of Greece and Rome. Modern art is what you get when you repudiate the people, the tradition, and the classics. Individuals are left to trade upon the stock of their native creativity alone, which is not going to be great. But we do spend money on buildings for mass entertainment. Cash-strapped cities are bullied by the owners of baseball and football teams to float bond issues for state-of-the-art stadiums. With computer-run scoreboards for flashing replays and commercials, booming sound systems that batter the ears of 50,000 people, food courts more varied and plentiful than a bazaar in old Baghdad in the days of the sultans, special enclaves where you can eat and drink without sparring while watching the ball game through plexiglass windows, grounds composed of special hybrids of grass, everything sharp, loud, bright, big, smart, and very expensive. We take more care of a ball field than we do of the church. If someone should argue that the ball field requires only prefabricated sections of this and that to be pieced together, while the church requires real craftsmanship from the human hand, I must reply that this is no answer at all. It is not true that hundreds of thousands of men who could support families by the skill of their hands do not do so now because we do not ask for those skills, except in the rare cases of homes for the wealthiest among us. We are servile for mass entertainment. When would we be free with our hearts and ourselves for the worship of God, which truly builds up a human community, rather than just hurting people in an aggregate of many thousands who do not know one another, and whose only common bond is that they prefer a certain style of uniform? But why would we care to make our churches beautiful when what goes on in them is slipshod and is not felt to be of even temporal consequence, let alone eternal? We do nothing in the week that is more significant than to serve God by prayer. That is a fact. We have forgotten it. Our hearts skip a beat when someone gives us a surprise ticket to the baseball game. Those same hearts plod along at their usual sluggish tempo when we dress for church. If we dress for church at all. So we end up with stadiums that will not last 20 years before the owners of the ball club demand new ones. Chartres Cathedral has been standing for 800 years. Think of it, everyone. Preachers, parishioners, choristers, artists. And let me try. What is this? See, this fact I've forgotten. Oh, about worshiping God. Excellent, an excellent point. And the temporal importance. That was what really got to me. What he misses here is that what's going on with our churches, and the reason that our churches are rather lackluster and we're all plodding and whatnot, is because our churches have become in many cases no longer houses of worship. It's not the objective anymore. The objective now is, it's basically what they are is socialist clubhouses. One of the examples I use is, I think it's First United Methodist Church, and it's in Pasadena, California. And it was in the news because there was a threat by, I think it was the Bush administration, to remove the church's tax-exempt status because the church wanted to talk to its parishioners about who to vote for and about political issues. And basically that's what you end up with. How many times do you go by a church and they have some sign outside that expresses some type of a political preference? Very often you'll see a rainbow-colored flag, or you'll see a message about illegal immigrants. They're engaging in politics here. That's not why I go to church. If I want to hear about politics, I'll go to a political rally. I go to church to deal with the eternal. Okay, that's the only place I can go to have somebody minister to my immortal soul. But that's not what's going on there anymore. There are socialists that become ministers and priests because the garb, the authority that goes along with it makes for an excellent shield against criticism. They can step into the pulpit, they can espouse socialism, godless, by the way, socialism, and basically make political speeches from the pulpit and shield themselves from criticism by having the authority of the church, by the uniform that they're wearing, which symbolizes the authority of the church. Shame on these people for doing it. It's blasphemous. And I hope that they recognize the sins that they are committing, and I hope that they repent of those sins. But that's what's going on in our churches. That's why you have more people that are, as he's saying, willing to attend a football game, get excited about going to a football game, than getting excited about going to church. Why do I want to go to church and hear a political speech? And that extends to the rest of our lives. So much of American life, it used to be politics had its place. You got up in the morning, you did what you had to do, you paid your bills, you went to work, you went to school, whatever you did, and you don't hear anything about politics the entire day until you go home at night and turn on the news. And you had news was on, I believe it was from 5 to 6 or 6:30. So it's like the first news was local news. So you turn at 5 o'clock, you had the 5 o'clock news, and then I think it was until 6:30. So 5 to 6 was the local news. Okay, and the local news was forbidden from doing any stories of national or international scale. They could only do things that were basically local or statewide. So you get that news. At 6 o'clock would come what was called the evening news. So you had CBS, the three major stations, CBS, NBC, ABC, would all have their evening news in which they would discuss the issues of the day internationally and nationally. That's where Walter Cronkite came in. Okay, and so they would all discuss the news, and you would of course, get politics. And then after that, you were done. You would maybe go on and watch game shows, or all the way up until maybe 10:30, 11:30 at night, and watch Johnny Carson and go to bed. And when I was really young, television didn't go 24 hours. It went till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and then they would play the national anthem, show a picture of the flag, and then it would be a test pattern until 6 o'clock in the morning. But anyways, the point is that you got a limited dose of politics. Life wasn't about politics. Okay, in the United States of America, it was about living your life. It was about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You went about your life pursuing happiness in the best way you saw fit as an individual. Today, life increasingly is about politics everywhere you turn. From the time you get up in the morning till the time you go to bed at night, Monday through Friday, Saturday, and Sunday when you go to church. So why? Why do I want to go to church? So that I can be lectured to yet again. Because again, even on the radio, you've got television, CNN, MSNBC, you've got Rush Limbaugh, you've got Sean Hannity, and then on Sunday, when I want to go and contemplate the mysteries of the universe, I'm going to get more of a political lecture? Why do I want to bother? And what was interesting is that over the years, as this socialism of the churches became more socialized, let's put it that way, they're losing people. They're losing parishioners. And so they put out polls and surveys to try to find out why. And the left answered those polls and surveys and said, it's because you're not relevant. In other words, because you're not secular. Because you're not worldly. You're not concerning yourself with abortion. You're not concerning yourself with gays and same-sex marriages. Because you're not concerning yourself with immigrants and emigrants, or immigration and emigration. And it's a lie. It's a fiction. And the church or churches should have seen through that and said, well, that may very well be. If people are going to church to expect to hear that, they're here for the wrong reason. But instead, churches did the opposite. They said, well, then we better get with the program. Add to the fact that, again, you had more socially active people getting into the ministry, becoming priests. And now you have not churches, not houses of worship, but socialist clubhouses. So that's going to be that for that particular book, and I'll be back in a minute. Thank you very much. And The Reactionary Mind is a new book that I have picked up, and it is basically it sort of equates being a reactionary with being a conservative. So it's an excellent book because it's not true. If you're not a conservative, but you're not on the left either, you're not idealistic, then you are a reactionary. Rush Limbaugh is a reactionary. Sean Hannity is a reactionary. Glenn Beck is a reactionary. All of the right-wing pundits that I've heard on the radio are reactionaries. They're not conservatives. So this is a book that goes into the definitions of the two and how they came about. So let's see. Liberal writers have always portrayed right-wing politics as an emotional swamp rather than a movement of considered opinion. Thomas Paine claimed counter-revolution entailed, quote, an obliteration of knowledge, unquote. Lionel Trilling described American conservatism as a melange of, quote, irritable mental gestures which seek to resemble ideas, unquote. Robert Paxton called fascism an, quote, affair of the gut, not of the brain, unquote. Conservatives, for their part, have tended to agree. It was Palmerston, after all, when he was still a Tory, who first attached the epithet stupid to the Conservative Party. Playing the part of the dull-witted country squire, conservatives have embraced the position of F.J.C. Earnshaw that, quote, it is commonly sufficient for practical purposes if conservatives, without saying anything, just sit and think, or even if they merely sit, unquote. While the aristocratic overtones of that discourse no longer resonate, the conservative still holds on to the label of the untutored and the unlettered. It's part of his populist charm and demotic appeal. As the conservative Washington Times observes, Republicans, quote, often call themselves the stupid party, unquote. Nothing, as we shall see, could be further from the truth. Conservatism is an idea-driven praxis, and no amount of preening from the right or polemic from the left can reduce or efface the catalog of mind one finds there. Conservatives themselves will likely be put off by this argument for a different reason. It threatens the purity and profundity of conservative ideas. For many, the word reaction connotates an unthinking, lowly grab for power, but reaction is not reflex. It begins from a position of principle, that some are fit and thus ought to rule others, and then recalibrates that principle in light of a democratic challenge from below. This recalibration is no easy task, for such challenges tend, by their very nature, to disprove the principle. After all, if a ruling class is truly fit to rule, how and why has it allowed a challenge to its power to emerge? What does the emergence of the one say about the fitness of the other? The conservative faces an additional hurdle: how to defend a principle of rule in a world where nothing is solid. All is in flux. From the moment conservatism came onto the scene, it had to contend with the decline of ancient and medieval ideas of an orderly universe in which permanent hierarchies of power reflected the eternal structure of the cosmos. The overthrow of the old regime reveals not only the weakness and incompetence of its leaders, but also a larger truth about the lack of design in the world. The idea that conservatism reflects the revelation that the world has no natural hierarchies might seem odd in our age of intelligent design, but as Kevin Madison and others have pointed out, intelligent design is not based on the same kind of medieval assumption of a firm eternal structure to the universe, and there's more than a touch of relativism and skepticism to its arguments. Indeed, one of the intelligent design's leading proponents has claimed that though he's, quote, no postmodernist, unquote, he has, quote, learned a lot from postmodernism, unquote. Reconstructing the old regime in the face of a declining faith in permanent hierarchies has proven to be a difficult feat. Not surprisingly, it has also produced some of the most remarkable works of modern thought. So I want to stop it right there for now and comment so far. There's more to the book that I haven't read. I should probably start from the beginning and read this book, but it's fascinating this way because basically what he's trying to do is make the argument that being a reactionary is the same thing as being a conservative. I make the opposite argument. I say that being a true conservative has nothing to do with being a reactionary. And he is basically approaching being a conservative or reactionary from the standpoint of power. He's approaching everything from a psychological and psychologistic standpoint. He is defining things the way the left would define them. He is falling into that trap, agreeing to define conservatism not by what it is, by essences, but by accidents, by what it appears to be. And he basically defines it by power. The idea is that the left is always trying to get disperse power in a society, and the right is the one that is basically saying that there's some people that are fit to rule and should therefore rule and be in power, and there are those that are not fit to rule and they should just basically do as they're told. And the Democrats are always trying to get more and more people to put more and more people in power, so to speak. Try to get power to the powerless. And it has nothing to do with that. It's all of that is psychology, psychologistic, and may or may not be true. It's impossible to prove one way or another, but it really has to do with the breakdown in terms of intellectuality and psychology. That the left has a tendency to be psychologistic, that the left is also nihilistic, that it has a tendency to deny, it doesn't have a tendency, it actually does deny objectivity, it denies certainty, it denies morality, and it denies beauty. And it is conservatism that acknowledges all of those things. That is what gives conservatism its power, because conservatism is realistic. And it is therefore conservatives and conservatism, well, I'll say conservatives, not conservatism, or reactionaries, more appropriately put, that have aided and abetted the left, because the left cannot make anything happen without the right, because the left is psychologistic, it is imaginary, it is caught up in power struggles, it is caught up in visions, and it is always, again, engaged in psychologistic practices, which is always internal, is always looking inward and trying to find answers to problems inward. Conservatism is the opposite way. We deal with the outside world. We are the people that are actually putting things together, making things happen, building things, creating things. And so if the left wants to be able to create a society, be able to make real their dreams, hopes, and ambitions, they must have the cooperation of the right. And for anyone that thinks that the left is out to obliterate the right, they're mistaken. Okay, for the people that really know what's going on the left, the really higher echelon thinkers on the left, they know that there is no way that the right can be or should be destroyed. That if it is, then the hopes for the creation and or the coming to fruition of the hopes, dreams, and ambitions of the left will be destroyed along with the right, along with conservatives. So it is conservatives that need to, again, true conservatism is about making the presumption for the status quo and about asking why rather than why not, about being open-minded. If we want to do a change, completely revamp our society and have an electric train that runs across the ocean, okay, why should we do that? Well, in 12 years, the whole planet's going to die. Okay, what's happening? What's going to create the death of the planet? Global warming or climate change. Okay, how is it going to do that? And why is it 12 years? Well, are you sure it's not 5 years? Are you sure it's not 20 years? It is the burden of the left. The left is always looking for change. And it is the person that wants change that has the burden of proof, always. So if you're a conservative and people are coming to you and saying, why not all the time, you got to turn that around. You have to turn that around and ask them why. And tell them if you have to, the question isn't why not, the question is why. So, because they have, whoever wants to change, whoever wants things different, whether it's a kid, hey, can we, instead of having meat and potatoes tonight, can we have pizza? Why? Why should we do that? Why should we do it differently? Can I have something different than somebody else? Why? If you're a supervisor and people are coming to you, why not? No, the question is, why? Why not change things so that X, Y, Z happens? Okay, well, why should we do that? How are things going to be better by doing that? And put the pressure on them, because it's possible to prove a positive. It is impossible to prove a negative. And what they hope to do by putting you on the spot and asking why not and asking you to prove a negative is to basically get you to give up. Throw up your hands and say, fine, do whatever you want. That's what they're looking for on the left. And the person on the right, the true conservative, merely has to stand their ground. Ask the questions. If the questions don't get answered to your satisfaction, then you tell them, why don't you do some more research? Why don't you think about it a little bit longer? And when you have the right answer, come back and we'll talk again. See, very civilized. We don't have to gouge each other's eyes out. Okay? You just simply stand your ground. Because I am open-minded. There are times when that scream out for change. Slavery, Jim Crow, to name but two. Okay? And usually, again, if there's an obvious case for change, everybody's going to see it. And it's not just a case of do we change, but what do we change into? What do we do differently, and how? How do we get there? But the point is that the burden of proof is always on the people that want change. So, by simply going into it with an open mind, demanding answers to questions, and not being moved until you get those answers, you remain a true conservative and not a reactionary. Reactionaries can't win. Reactionaries are defiant. If the left says X, Y, Z, then I have to say A, B, C. That's a reactionary. An example of that from Rush Limbaugh is he was quoting Nancy Pelosi about the impeachment of President Trump. And Nancy Pelosi was saying, well, first thing that has to happen is we have to do an investigation, and we have to see whether or not the facts that are revealed by that investigation create a situation that warrants the issuing of articles of impeachment, and that's basically the way it goes. Now, is there anything that she said there that's wrong? No. That's right. That's exactly the way things go. They do an investigation, and then they determine whether or not there's anything there that rises to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors. And if there isn't, then they don't issue the articles. If there is, they do. It's very reasonable, very realistic. Rush Limbaugh was analyzing what she said, and he couldn't argue, obviously, with what she said. So what he did instead was question her motives. The idea is that she must be doing something devious here. There must be some kind of underhanded skullduggery going on, because somebody on the left wouldn't normally speak in a realistic or rational manner. And while he's partially right in that people on the left don't usually do that, in this case they did. And it wasn't even Nancy Pelosi. I made a mistake, my mistake. It was Hillary Clinton that was talking about. Somebody asked Hillary Clinton about impeaching Donald Trump, and she had a very reasonable, rational answer, again, where she said, well, investigations can have to be conducted, and if, the facts and the whatnot warrant, there's high crimes and misdemeanors are revealed by this investigation, then we go ahead and do that. But, and again, Rush Limbaugh has to question her motives instead of saying she's right. Okay, when the left is right, the left is right. Doesn't matter. Okay, and I want to encourage the left to be rational, reasonable, and realistic. Because ultimately that's the way the left is going to be destroyed in this country. The less psychologistic it acts, the more conservative it acts. So that brings me to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, thank you very much for listening. Have a great day.